Her name is Claire Morgan, and even now her hands still tremble when she remembers the day everything unraveled. For 5 years she had worked herself to the bone, building a future brick by brick, cutting corners on vacations, driving a rusting sedan until its doors squealed, and storing away every spare dollar until she finally had enough to buy the one thing that proved to herself that she could stand on her own: her house, her sanctuary, her dream. What she never expected was that the people who had rocked her to sleep as a child, the very people who had shaped her sense of family, would one day try to rip it away from her. And not for themselves, but for her older sister, who they believed deserved it more. It started at a place that had always felt safe, almost sacred in the rhythms of family tradition. A restaurant tucked into the edge of town, with chandeliers that cast warm golden light across polished wood and linen-covered tables. For 2 decades this was where birthdays were celebrated, anniversaries toasted, and new babies passed from arm to arm. Claire never thought she would walk into that familiar dining room and walk out a different person. That Sunday afternoon was supposed to be simple. A gathering for her Aunt Margaret's 70th birthday. The long table stretched nearly the entire length of the room, decorated with orchids and candles, as though nothing could disturb the warmth of the occasion. Claire slipped into her chair between her cousin Daniel and her Uncle James, letting the familiar smells of seafood bisque and baked bread comfort her. She was not prepared for what her parents had planned. Her father, Robert Morgan, had a way of commanding a room. Even now, years past his service, the crispness of his voice still carried the tone of a man accustomed to obedience. The clink of his spoon against a water glass silenced the laughter at once. Her mother, Linda, stood beside him, her hand resting gently but firmly on his shoulder, a picture of unity. But Claire recognized that look in their eyes. It was the same look that had always meant an announcement was coming, one that would not be up for debate. Before anyone could sing for Margaret, her father's voice carried across the room. He spoke of sacrifice, of family duty, of how sometimes those who had more must give up for those who had less. His words seemed noble at first, until he drew a white envelope from his jacket and placed it before Claire. Her fingers hesitated as she opened it, the air around her suddenly still, and the words at the top leapt off the page in his bold, unmistakable handwriting: "Notice to vacate." Her heart thudded. Surely this was some misguided joke. But her father's expression left no room for laughter. Her sister, Sarah, sat across the table with red eyes and tissues at the ready, perfectly poised for sympathy. Their parents spoke of Sarah's divorce, of her 2 children, of the need for stability. The room of 20 relatives turned toward Claire, as if waiting for her to nod in agreement, to surrender without question. The paper in her hand was ridiculous, not a trace of legality about it, nothing but her father's handwriting demanding she hand over the home she had worked years to earn. She could barely find her voice, reminding them that they had not co-signed her loan, that she had qualified and paid every cent herself. Yet the accusations piled on. Her aunt called her selfish. An uncle muttered that she should think of the children. Her cousin raised a phone and began recording, his lens capturing her humiliation. Every lie, every exaggeration Sarah and her parents spun chipped away at the truth of who Claire really was. To them she was single Claire, a woman taking up space better suited for a real family, a woman who rattled around in a house with too many rooms, too many bathrooms, too much freedom. They ignored the office where she built her consulting business, the library where she found her quiet, the basement where her art breathed life into empty evenings. None of it mattered. They had painted her as selfish, and the portrait stuck. The whispers around the table pressed against her chest, until she could hardly breathe. Her father spoke of sacrifice again, of signing to keep the peace, of doing what family demanded. Her sister added her tears, her pleas, her children's names as weapons, and Claire sat there with trembling hands, realizing this was not about sheltering children or rescuing a broken marriage. This was about putting her in her place, about teaching her that her independence had limits when it clashed with family's expectations. If you have ever felt the crushing weight of family pressure, the kind that makes you doubt your own worth, then you understand the storm rising in Claire's chest that day. It was the beginning of a confrontation that would shatter the foundation of her family and reveal just how far love can bend before it breaks. Claire sat frozen, the words on the page burning into her eyes. She wanted to laugh, to throw it down and call it absurd, but her father's stern gaze and her mother's tightened lips told her this was no joke. The hush around the table thickened, as though the chandeliers themselves held their breath. Sarah dabbed delicately at her eyes, her shoulders trembling, and the timing was perfect. Her children needed a home. Her children deserved stability. And Claire, single Claire with her 3-bedroom house, was being asked no, commanded to step aside. Her mother's voice, smooth but sharp, sliced through the silence. You can rent a cozy apartment downtown. You'd be closer to work. It's not as though you need all that space. Her words carried an air of reason, but they were wrapped in judgment, heavy with implication. Claire felt her chest tighten, the air around her filled with the echoes of approval from certain relatives. Aunt Carol chimed in from the far end, declaring that it was selfish for one person to occupy so much space. Uncle James nodded gravely, muttering that family helps family. Claire's mind swirled. She thought of every overtime hour she had worked, every bonus she had saved, every trip she had turned down so she could save enough for the down payment. $65,000. 5 years of sacrifice. And now, with one envelope and a chorus of relatives, it was being treated as though it belonged to everyone but her. The accusations began to pile higher. Sarah reminded the room of old grievances, spinning tales of college funds and childhood selfishness. Their mother nodded along, weaving the past into the present as though it justified the theft of Claire's future. Each word pushed Claire further toward the edge of disbelief. She wanted to defend herself, to shout that she had built this life brick by brick, while Sarah had spent recklessly, chasing distractions instead of responsibilities. But she knew that to defend would make her look small, defensive, even cruel. Her father slid another paper toward her, this one written more neatly, an agreement to transfer the home. No need for lawyers, he said, as though he was offering her mercy. Claire's throat closed. They wanted her to sign, to surrender, surrounded by witnesses and cameras. She could see her cousin's phone still recording, capturing her hesitation for posterity, a video that would no doubt be replayed as evidence of her selfishness. The walls of the restaurant seemed to lean closer, pressing against her. She glanced at her grandmother, who finally spoke, her voice weary but firm. In my day, family shared everything. This individualism, Claire, is what's wrong with your generation. The irony cut deep. Her grandmother lived alone in a sprawling house since her husband's passing, yet here she was preaching about sacrifice. Claire swallowed hard. She wanted to scream the truth, that her mortgage was less than a quarter of her income, that she had just been promoted, that she had never missed a single payment, that this home was not a whim but a testament to her grit. But her words felt caged, trapped by the sheer weight of the judgment pressing down. Her sister rose, her performance reaching its crescendo. She swayed, her tears flowing, her voice trembling. We're crammed in our parents' basement while Claire rattles around in 3 bathrooms she doesn't even use. The room gasped. Claire corrected softly, almost involuntarily. 2 bathrooms. But her father seized on it. See? You argue about bathrooms while children suffer. The verdict seemed sealed, disapproving shakes of heads, mutters of, heartless. Even the baby had stopped fussing, as if waiting for her to break. And in that moment, Claire realized the truth that sliced deeper than all the lies. This was never about practicality. This was about putting her in her place, stripping her independence, reminding her that family power always outweighed personal sacrifice. Her pulse pounded. Her throat was dry. She knew she had to act, but her body felt paralyzed. She managed only a whisper. I need a minute. Her mother sneered, cruel and quick. What for? To call some boyfriend to rescue you? Oh wait, you don't have one. The words stung like a slap, sharper than anything else spoken that afternoon. Claire stood, clutching her purse. She told them she was heading to the restroom, though she already felt the vibration of her phone in her hand. 3 missed calls. A name she recognized, Marcus Chen. The attorney who had helped her close on her house. Why was he calling on a Sunday? Her fingers trembled as she texted him, desperate, the truth pouring out in jagged words. Within moments, his reply came. Clear, firm, commanding. Do not sign anything. On my way. 15 minutes. For the first time since the envelope had slid across the table, Claire felt the faintest flicker of hope. Claire stood in the hallway just outside the dining room, her heart thundering as she read the attorney's second message. Check your email. Sent you something Friday about your deed. Important. Her hands shook as she pulled up her inbox, scrolling to the message she had brushed aside in the rush of work. She had barely skimmed it then, assuming it was routine legal jargon. Now the subject line glared at her. Special Protection Clause activation. She opened it, her pulse racing with each word. It was not routine at all. Through the heavy door she could hear the muffled hum of voices, her father's commanding tone, Sarah's theatrical sobs, the low murmur of relatives debating whether Claire had finally gone too far. She wanted to run, to disappear, but the weight of the document in her email anchored her. It spelled out protections she had not realized she possessed, protections designed exactly for the kind of coercion she now faced. Her attorney had thought of this before she had, and she silently thanked her past self for listening to his advice, even when she had considered it unnecessary. Her phone buzzed again. Marcus's words were short, precise, perfect. The more witnesses, the better. She inhaled, squared her shoulders, and pushed the door open. The air inside was heavier than before. The atmosphere shifted from tense to openly hostile. They had moved her chair, placing it between Sarah and her mother, as if to box her in. "Ready to do the right thing?" her mother asked coldly. Her father slammed his palm against the table, rattling glasses, his face flushed with anger. "Sign it now." Claire slid back into her chair carefully, her voice calm, though her insides screamed. "I haven't decided anything." Her father roared that she was stalling. Sarah accused her of hiding assets. Her mother dug her nails into Claire's hand, hissing about compassion and 28 years of sacrifice. Claire whispered the truth that she had paid them back for college, that she had carried her own weight, but her father loomed over her, his shadow swallowing her. "Family isn't about money," he thundered. "Then why are you trying to take my house?" The words escaped her lips before she could stop them. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah burst into tears on cue, claiming Claire would rather see children homeless than share. Claire reminded her sister that she was not homeless, that she was living comfortably in their parents' house. Sarah's wail rose higher, declaring her children lived in a basement and deserved better. Claire's own words slipped out sharp as a blade. "Then work for it like I did." The eruption was instant. Gasps, cries of heartless. Even her grandmother clutched her chest as though Claire's words had pierced through generations of tradition. Her phone buzzed against the table. "Marcus. 5 minutes. Don't sign anything. Recording everything." She glanced at her cousin, still filming, and a small spark of strength flickered inside her. Evidence. Proof. This humiliation was not just her burden, it was becoming her defense. Her parents pressed harder. They threatened her with disinheritance, with exclusion, with the loss of every holiday, every connection. Sarah slid the paper and pen closer, whispering broken pleas about her babies. Claire's pulse hammered, her mouth dry, but before she could answer, the door to the private dining room opened. A figure stepped inside, the presence cutting through the chaos like a blade through smoke. Marcus Chen. His suit crisp, his demeanor calm, his voice steady as he introduced himself not as a friend, not as a guest, but as Claire's attorney. The room fell into stunned silence. Her father's voice wavered for the first time. "Attorney?" Her mother's hand dropped the phone she had snatched from the table. Sarah's mouth hung open, her tears forgotten in shock. Marcus moved with quiet authority, pulling out his phone to photograph the so-called eviction notice, chuckling softly, as though the attempt amused him. "This," he said, holding it up, "is not a legal document, it is not even close. It is, at best, scrap paper." Her father bristled, insisting it was a formal notice, but Marcus brushed him off. "It would not hold in any court, it would not even hold as a joke." The shift in power was instant, and Claire could feel the energy in the room begin to tilt. What had been a tribunal of relatives pressing her into submission now sat in uneasy silence as Marcus laid out the truth. Her name alone was on the deed. No one had co-signed, no one had contributed to the down payment. Legally, morally, ethically, the house was hers and hers alone. Her parents' claims dissolved under the weight of fact, and for the first time that day, Claire felt the chains of pressure loosen. Then her phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. Security footage saved. Management. She looked toward the door and saw the restaurant manager standing discreetly, offering her a small nod. They had been recording. Every word, Every threat, every lie. The tide had turned, but the storm was only beginning. The air in the room felt icy as Marcus placed his leather briefcase on the table, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. What you have attempted here is not just a family disagreement. It is an act of coercion, bordering on fraud, and if we were to step outside and walk into a police station right now, some of you would be facing charges. Aunt Carol's voice cracked. Police? Why would the police be involved? She glanced nervously toward her husband, her earlier confidence fading. Because pressuring someone to sign away property under threats of exile or disinheritance is a form of fraud, Marcus explained calmly, his eyes locking on Robert, Claire's father. And given that we have more than 20 witnesses, a written notice, and video evidence, this case is airtight. The silence was so heavy Claire could hear her own heartbeat. Sarah's tears dried instantly. Case? What case? She demanded, her tone sharp now, her theatrics forgotten. The one Claire will file if this harassment continues, Marcus said simply. He asked the table a series of pointed questions. Who had contributed to Claire's down payment? Silence. Who had co-signed her mortgage? Silence again. Each unanswered question tightened the noose, and Claire watched the shame creep across faces that just moments ago had been filled with judgment. Through the wide window, another car pulled up. A woman stepped out, dressed in a navy suit, carrying a portfolio that looked heavy with official seals. She walked with precision, as though each step was part of a practiced routine. The door opened, and her presence filled the space even before she spoke. Good afternoon, she said. Her tone was calm, professional, yet it carried the authority of someone who dealt daily with deceit. I'm Patricia Williams from the State Housing Authority. Her eyes swept the room, taking in the papers on the table, the tense faces. Sarah's theatrics paused mid-performance. It appears I arrived just in time. Claire blinked, stunned. She hadn't called this woman, hadn't even known she existed. Her mother rose immediately, her voice trembling with indignation. This is a family matter. We don't need outsiders meddling. Patricia didn't flinch. She looked directly at Sarah. Your panic attack is impressive, but I've read your housing application. You listed your current residence as your parents' 4-bedroom home, not their basement. You claimed no immediate need for emergency housing. That inconsistency alone puts you under review. Sarah's eyes widened, her act collapsing in an instant. You've been investigating me? She snapped, the weakness vanishing from her voice. No, Patricia replied. But when false claims are filed, they trigger reviews. And when someone reports potential housing fraud, our office takes notice. The words hit like a hammer. Claire's father flushed purple. Who reported us? He demanded. Patricia ignored the question, pulling out her tablet and lifting the handwritten eviction notice. This, she said, is evidence of attempted housing fraud, and when it involves conspiracy and falsified documentation, it can rise to a federal offense. Gasps echoed down the table. Federal? Aunt Margaret whispered, horrified. Patricia nodded. Yes. Attempting to coerce someone into surrendering their legal residence while simultaneously filing false hardship claims is not just unethical, it is illegal. Claire's blood ran cold, as Marcus explained the final piece. On Friday, someone attempted to add themselves to Claire's deed through the county clerk's office, claiming they had been left off the paperwork. Fortunately, Claire's enhanced protection deed flagged the attempt. His eyes locked on her parents. The signatures belonged to Robert and Linda Morgan. The gasp that followed was louder than any outburst so far. Even the relatives who had nodded along minutes earlier now looked horrified. Her mother sputtered. It wasn't stealing. We were protecting family assets. By committing fraud? Patricia's question landed like a blow. That alone carries a minimum sentence. Claire stared at her parents, her voice barely a whisper. You tried to steal my house before today? Before all of this? Her father's reply was as chilling as it was revealing. If you had just given it to Sarah willingly, none of this would have been necessary. The restaurant manager stepped closer, his face respectful but firm. Miss Morgan is a valued customer. She decides who stays and who goes. All eyes shifted to Claire. For the first time all afternoon, she realized the power had shifted fully into her hands. Marcus opened a thick folder, placing it before her parents. Here are your options. Criminal charges for fraud and conspiracy. or signed agreements promising never to attempt this again, never to lay claim to Claire's property, and to vacate her home within 48 hours. Choose wisely. The storm had broken. The truth was no longer buried beneath accusations and manipulation. It stood in the open, undeniable, and for the first time, Claire felt the ground beneath her feet solidify. Her parents sat frozen, the weight of Marcus's words pressing down harder than any disapproving glance Claire had endured that afternoon. Her mother's hand trembled as she reached for the pen but hesitated, glancing at Robert, who stared at the papers as if they were weapons. "We need a lawyer," he muttered, his voice stripped of its usual command. "You should have thought of that before you tried to forge your daughter's deed," Patricia replied coolly. "Mr. Chen is offering you a chance to avoid prison. I suggest you take it." The shuffle of chairs echoed as relatives shifted uncomfortably. Aunt Carol, who only minutes earlier had called Claire selfish, leaned forward, her tone suddenly sweet. "Claire, darling, I had no idea it was this serious." But Claire met her eyes and said nothing. The mask had slipped from them all. They weren't protecting family, they were protecting themselves. Marcus's voice was steady as he explained the consequences. Option 1. Full criminal charges. That includes attempted grand theft, conspiracy, and fraud. Minimum 2 years in prison for the primary conspirators. Option 2. Protective orders. Claire can file restraining orders against each participant, legally barring you from coming near her or her home. Option 3. Private agreements with strict conditions. Full apologies, permanent recognition of her ownership, and Sarah's removal from the property within 48 hours. The murmur around the table rose like a swarm of bees. Sarah, her voice hoarse from crying, tried to rally sympathy. "This isn't fair. I'm going through a divorce. My children need stability." Marcus leaned forward, his words sharp. "Your divorce is not Claire's responsibility, and if you continue pressing, this attempted fraud could cost you custody altogether." That silenced her. Claire watched her sister's face crumble, real fear finally cracking through the rehearsed tears. For years, Sarah had used drama to bend others to her will. Now her own performance had cornered her. Her cousin Daniel, still clutching his phone, shifted nervously. Marcus turned his gaze on him. "You recorded everything, didn't you?" Daniel swallowed hard. "Yes." "Good," Marcus said. "That video will be invaluable evidence. If you're willing to provide it, you'll likely be granted immunity." "Immunity?" Robert barked, his voice rough with disbelief. "You're treating this like a crime." "Because it is a crime," Patricia interjected, scrolling through her tablet. "And to be clear, when 3 or more people conspire to defraud someone of property worth more than $250,000, it is classified as conspiracy to commit grand theft." The words slammed into the room like a thunderclap. $250,000, that was the value of Claire's home, the value her parents had tried to strip from her. She felt her breath hitch, the enormity of it sinking in. It wasn't just betrayal, it was calculated theft. Her father's shoulders sagged, his face pale. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," he muttered. But Marcus wasn't finished. He laid out more evidence, bank statements proving Claire had paid every cent of the down payment, her mortgage approval, her steady income. There was no loophole, no avenue for argument. The house was hers, and theirs was a scheme stripped bare for all to see. Her mother finally picked up the pen, tears streaming silently down her face. She signed, her signature shaky, the ink smudging under her hand. Robert followed, his name scrawled in defeat rather than dignity. Sarah held out the longest, muttering that it wasn't fair, that she needed help. But when Marcus calmly told her fraud would guarantee she lost custody, she scrawled her name too, the pen clattering against the wood as though it burned her. One by one, the conspirators signed their names, their power slipping away with each stroke. Marcus gathered the documents, sliding them neatly into his folder. "Violation of any term will result in immediate prosecution," he said. "And Claire has requested an additional clause. From this moment forward, no family member may ask her for money, property, or financial support. Any request voids this agreement." A collective gasp rippled through the room. "You can't cut us off like that," Linda cried. "You tried to steal her home," Marcus reminded her coldly. "You're lucky prison is not already waiting." Claire finally found her voice, steady now. You stopped being my parents the moment you forged my name. The restaurant manager cleared his throat gently. Miss Morgan, would you like these guests to remain or to leave? Claire looked around the table at the faces that had judged her, accused her, and betrayed her. Her gaze landed on her Aunt Margaret, the one person who had sat silently, her eyes filled with quiet understanding. Claire straightened her shoulders. Everyone except Aunt Margaret can leave. The power in the room shifted entirely. For the first time in her life, Claire held the authority, not because she had demanded it, but because she had earned it. The room dissolved into chaos, as relatives pushed back their chairs, their murmurs thick with resentment, disbelief, and shame. Some whispered apologies as they passed Claire. Flimsy words meant more to soothe their own guilt than to heal the damage they had helped cause. Others kept their eyes averted, unable to meet her gaze. Sarah lingered near the door, her face streaked with tears that this time seemed more genuine than performative. She opened her mouth, but Marcus stepped between them, his posture firm. Your belongings will be removed from Claire's home within 48 hours under supervised conditions. You will not step foot in her property again without legal oversight. Sarah's voice cracked, desperate now. You really hate me that much? Claire's reply was calm, deliberate. I don't hate you. I nothing you. You are simply someone who tried to rob me and failed. The words hung in the air, heavier than any accusation. For the first time, Sarah had no reply. Robert stiffened, trying to salvage his dignity. This isn't over, he said darkly. But Marcus was already at Claire's side. It is over, he countered. And I'd caution you, Mr. Morgan, because that sounded a lot like a threat. Would you like to revise your statement? Robert clenched his jaw, but his silence was answer enough. The restaurant staff moved efficiently, clearing untouched plates and extinguishing candles that had burned low. Aunt Margaret remained at Claire's side, her quiet presence like an anchor in the storm. When the last of the family had shuffled out, Margaret finally spoke, her voice warm and steady. That was overdue by about 10 years. Claire blinked, startled. You knew? Margaret's smile was tinged with sadness. I saw the way they treated you, always second best, always expected to give more than you got. When they kept asking about your house at Christmas, I suspected something. That's why I insisted on holding my birthday here. I thought a public place might keep them civilized. Shows what I know. She let out a soft, bitter laugh. Marcus closed his briefcase with a snap. Claire, you did the right thing. If you'd given in, it would only have escalated. Boundaries aren't cruelty, they're survival. The truth of his words sank deep. Claire had lost her family, at least the version of them she had once trusted. But she had kept her home, her dignity, and her future. For the first time, she understood that survival sometimes meant standing alone. The days that followed proved how deep the consequences reached. Sarah moved out within 47 hours, escorted by Marcus's assistant. She left behind damage that felt intentional stains on the carpet, holes in the walls, but Marcus documented every dollar's worth for the record. The county clerk's office flagged Robert's fraudulent deed attempt, and when he later tried to refinance his own home, the application was denied. His credit score plummeted, his financial stability crumbling. Linda discovered their homeowner's insurance had doubled, the fraud attempt now stamped into their public record. Sarah's custody battle took a devastating turn. David's lawyer subpoenaed the restaurant footage, presenting it as evidence of Sarah's instability and willingness to engage in criminal schemes. The judge awarded David primary custody, granting Sarah only supervised weekend visits. The performance that once won her sympathy now stood as proof of her recklessness. At work, Claire braced herself for whispers, for judgment. Instead, something remarkable happened. Her colleagues respected her more. Her boss, who had fought her own family property battle years earlier, pulled Claire aside and said quietly, "You did what most people cannot. You chose yourself. That takes courage." Within 2 weeks, Claire was promoted from senior analyst to director of financial planning. The raise meant she could pay her mortgage off years ahead of schedule. Some relatives tried to test the boundaries, subtle jabs posted on social media about family choosing money over blood. Marcus responded with formal letters, and the posts disappeared. An uncle attempted to contact her under the guise of seeking financial advice. Claire's assistant, briefed on the protective order, flagged the call immediately. A cease and desist was delivered the same afternoon. The most surprising response came from her grandmother. Weeks later, a handwritten letter arrived through Marcus's office. The script was shaky but clear. I was wrong. I let my old ideas about family cloud my judgment. Your parents and sister took advantage of you, and I enabled them. I am leaving you something in my will. Not money, but something I know you'll value. Do not contact me. I need time to face what I've become. But know this, I see you clearly now. Claire tucked the letter away, unsure how to feel, but knowing at least that her truth had finally been acknowledged. 3 months passed. Through Aunt Margaret, she learned her parents had entered counseling, forced to confront the reality of what they had nearly lost to their own arrogance. Sarah had moved back in with them, right where she started, her life spiraling in a loop of dependency. Claire did not reach out. She no longer needed their approval, their validation, or their company. Her house became a sanctuary again, a place of renewal, instead of fear. She repainted Sarah's old room, turning it into a sunlit office for her consulting work. She hung artwork in the basement studio, filling it with color and energy. She lined her library with books that spoke to resilience and independence. Each room told a story of survival, of dignity, of a woman who refused to surrender what she had earned. And with every mortgage payment, every sunrise spilling across her own windows, Claire whispered to herself the words she had once been too afraid to believe. This is mine. I have earned this. I will protect it. Seasons turned, and with them came the quiet kind of peace Claire had once thought was impossible. The house that her family had tried to take from her grew into more than walls and furniture. It became a reflection of her independence, every corner filled with choices that were hers alone. She planted flowers in the front yard, painting the entrance in blooms of color, a silent declaration that this home was not up for debate. Neighbors noticed the change. Without Sarah's car blocking driveways or children running wild at all hours, the street seemed calmer. Mrs. Chen from next door, who had witnessed Sarah's tantrums more than once, brought over a plate of cookies one afternoon. You did the right thing, she said, her voice soft but certain. Family that treats you like that isn't family at all. At work, Claire's new role blossomed into opportunities she had never dared to imagine. She became known as someone who could handle pressure with grace, someone who wouldn't be bent by intimidation or manipulation. Clients trusted her more deeply, sensing her strength, and her consulting side business tripled within months. When she applied for a business loan to expand her practice, the bank officer glanced at her paperwork and paused at the property protection clause. Smart move, he said, nodding approvingly. Too many people lose everything to family fraud. This shows foresight. The loan was approved with the lowest rate available, a reward not just for her financial discipline but for her courage. Not all consequences were professional. Some were deeply personal. Her father had tried to challenge the agreements through a lawyer, but after reviewing the evidence, even that lawyer advised him to stop. He was lucky, the lawyer said, to have avoided prison. That reality silenced further attempts. For the first time in her life, Claire felt the weight of her father's control lifted, replaced by a quiet void she realized was freedom. Sarah's story twisted down a different path. Without Claire's home as her safety net, she was forced to face the consequences of her choices. She found a job in retail, not glamorous, but honest. The woman who had once relied on manipulation discovered that tears no longer opened doors. For the first time perhaps, she was forced to stand on her own, though the bitterness never quite left her eyes when Claire saw her at a distance. Through it all, Aunt Margaret became the family Claire chose. They met for lunches, sharing stories over coffee and sandwiches, never speaking of the others unless absolutely necessary. One afternoon, Margaret studied her carefully and said, "You're thriving. Cutting out the poison was the best medicine you could have taken." Claire smiled, realizing how true that was. The story didn't stay confined to Claire's circle. 6 months after the confrontation, Patricia Williams called. "Your case," she explained, "has become a training example for our department. We're creating an anonymized case study to teach investigators how to recognize family fraud patterns. With your permission, your experience will help others protect themselves." Claire agreed without hesitation. If her pain could prevent someone else from living through the same nightmare, then at least something good had come from it. Even her cousin Daniel reached out through Marcus. His video, the very one that had captured Claire's humiliation, became the evidence that protected her. "I'm sorry," he admitted, his voice shaky. "I didn't understand what I was part of until I watched it back. I'm setting my own boundaries now. I won't let them pull me into their schemes again." For the first time, Claire felt that maybe, just maybe, change was possible in the family tree. At home, her sanctuary continued to grow into a reflection of her heart. She painted the walls in colors she loved, hung art that inspired her, and filled shelves with books that reminded her of resilience. Each room was a chapter, a reminder that survival was not just about holding on, but about creating something new in the ashes of what had been. Then the call came that shifted everything again. Her grandmother had passed away. Claire braced herself for bitterness, for another round of inheritance battles, but what came was different. In her will, her grandmother left Claire her collection of first edition books, along with a handwritten note, "For the granddaughter who knew their worth." The gift was more than paper and ink. It was recognition, a silent apology, a validation that Claire had always deserved more than the dismissal and manipulation she had endured. She placed the collection in her library, where sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the spines. They became a symbol of both endings and beginnings. In quiet moments, Claire reflected on the journey. Family, she realized, wasn't defined by blood or tradition. Family was respect, mutual support, and love that didn't demand sacrifice as proof. The people who tried to strip her of everything were bound by blood, yes, but not by loyalty or compassion. The people who stood by her, Margaret, Marcus, even the restaurant manager who nodded in solidarity, those were the family she chose. To those listening, Claire's message was simple. Boundaries are not walls of hatred, they are fences built of wisdom, with gates that open only for those who earn entry. Saying no to toxic family is not selfish, it is survival. Her name is Claire Morgan. She owns her home, she owns her choices, she owns her peace, and for her, that is enough.